I was thinking, reading back on a number of your works, every time I finish one of your books, you have another one written, so it's very hard to keep up with you. But in your book, Winners, you talk a lot about Angela Merkel. And you talk about Angela Merkel being a really strong leader and how she debunked the myth that successful leaders are like risk seekers, are compellingly charismatic. Could you maybe start tonight by talking to us a little bit about leadership and what you see as good traits in a leader?
Well, of course, she now, because of what's happened in Ukraine and Germany's energy dependency on Russia, I guess her leadership has been marked down a little bit. But I think anyone in the modern age who is able to go through 4 terms as the leader of what is Europe's biggest economy and in many ways most significant country, there's clearly something very, very special going on there. And I think the thing about her is that there's in that book, Winners, which I wrote quite a few years ago now, but the thing I talk about strategy is that, and in the context of leadership, is that when you see somebody, say, pop up on the TV screen, or you see them on the front page of a newspaper, that they emanate something that you're going to absorb from them even before you know what the story is about. Right. And I think that is a strength of leadership, and she had that. You sort of knew where she was going to be because she's so located inside a kind of moral and political compass. And the thing, what I find fascinating about her is because you think of leadership in the modern age as all being, you mentioned charisma. Okay, and one of the things people are saying about Keir Starmer at the moment, oh, he doesn't have charisma and all this sort of stuff. And I think it's a lot less important than people think. And with what I love, the story I told in the book about Angela Merkel, which I loved, is the fact that she traveled the world. And the women in the room will find this a very odd observation. But she traveled the world with her own personal stylist, okay?
Yep.
Whose job was to make sure that nobody ever talked about how she looked. So the clothes, the hair, the makeup, it was all designed so that you didn't talk about what she would regard as the trivia. You saw her as a serious person. So I think she was a formidable leader. And I think that sometimes we overestimate. What I really liked, the other thing I liked about her, you never got the feeling that she was worried too much about what people were saying about her.
Yeah.
And I think that's another important trait in leadership. Of course, in the modern media age, and you've got, so much media debate about leaders and about what they do. But I think you've really got to believe in what you want to do as a leader, and you've got to keep on doing it for all the noise that goes on around you.
Yeah. Now, I suppose conversely, actually I was quite taken on your leading podcast, Our Own Leo Varadkar. I thought it was a very interesting podcast. And he mentioned 3 traits that a leader ought not to demonstrate.
Yeah.
And if my memory serves me right, they are bitterness, paranoia,
and jealousy.
So can you maybe talk to us about a time during your career where you think you've kind of witnessed those type of traits, or sort of more traits of a poor leader?
I thought it was a fascinating observation, that. And it was, when we interviewed him, we were just chatting away, and the questions sort of popped out. But it was definitely an answer he thought about. I don't know whether you've heard him say that before. And he's absolutely right. Yeah. Bitterness, paranoia, and jealousy. Now, let's be honest, a lot of people in politics display those traits. Bitterness, a lot of people go into politics and they think they should be a lot higher up the ladder than they are. Jealousy, they're jealous of the ones who are already higher up the ladder. And the paranoia is about the feeling that, people are out to get them. And there's a lot of that in politics as well. But I thought that was a really interesting observation. And, when you think about a bad leader, let's take a couple of recent examples.
We haven't even got 5 minutes in, and I know you're about to launch.
I'm not going to launch, but I mean, let's be honest. So who do you think I'm going to say? And? I mean, that is pretty incredible, isn't it? That you all, when I say bad leaders, you know who I'm going to talk about. Yeah. Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, who are truly terrible. I mean, some days I think Johnson's the worst Prime Minister in history, other days I think it's Truss. And at the moment we have Rishi Sunak, who kind of, you know, he gets quite a good press because he's not as big a liar as Johnson and he's not as utterly useless as Truss, right? But he's a very, very, very low bar. But what are the traits? What are the traits when you think about the trait with Johnson, and we see it in Truss as well, in Trump as well, is essentially they're in it for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
You know, they're not in public service to serve the public. Public service, at its best, is a noble calling, and it is about doing your best to serve the public. Johnson has got never has had any interest in serving the public. He is all about himself. Trump is all about himself. Liz Truss, I think the trait there, I mean, honestly, if I was Liz Truss, it's a year, right? It's a year since that kamikaze budget thing. If I was her, honestly, I'd definitely get facial change. I'd definitely wear a completely different wig that made me look totally different. I would emigrate for sure. And yet, she's written a book. Do you know what the title of her book is? 10 Years to Save the West by Liz Truss. So that's sort of, now listen, you need self-belief to be a strong leader. You do need self-belief. But once it becomes utter delusion of your own capacity, then we're in a very, very bad place. Do you know what, interesting though, when I think back of all the leaders that I saw with, you know, particularly working with Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, when I saw most of them up close, you can almost always see why they got to where they got to. Okay. Now with Johnson, you can see it if you think that the only thing that matters is, you know, being a character and having a bit of charisma. But there's nothing beyond that. With Truss, I just don't see it at all. I never did. It's not, that is not hindsight speaking. So I think that the thing about to get to the top level of politics, I think you do need to have something a bit special. And most of them do. But it is different. They don't all have the same qualities.
I think in your book you kind of summarized it really well by saying like the best leaders or the best team leaders are actually the team players. And there's probably an absence of that with certain of those leaders that you mentioned.
Well, I do. Look, I'm obsessed with sport, and I'm very sorry about the rugby, by the way. I am, genuinely.
So are we.
No, I really wanted Ireland to win once Scotland were out, and I was very, very sorry about that. I thought the last 10 minutes of that match were just unbelievable. But the reason I love sport is because I think you can learn so much about leadership and teamship and crisis management from watching the best of sport. It's why, even though it was a disaster because we lost every game, it's why I loved going on the Lions tour in New Zealand in 2005. But if I look at, I just don't think you can be a good leader unless you've got a commitment to the team, because you won't get the commitment from the team unless you give. So when I see people like Johnson, Trump, I mean, how many, when Tony Blair was in power, Tony Blair had the same chief of staff from when he became leader of the opposition to when he left Downing Street. So that's, one, he picks good people. Two, you command loyalty. But you don't command loyalty by commanding it, demanding it. You get loyalty by showing that you understand what your team is for and what they're good at, and you respect them for it. And so I do believe that. I think the best, if I think of all the great leaders, I think they are ultimately, they're not just leaders, but they understand the importance of the team.
You also create a great culture in that environment, and there's a great piece, I think it's in the Blair years or the Blair diaries that you mentioned on a flight. Tony's PA. It
was my PA.
Your PA came up to Tony and said, "I think you need to go back."
Your speech is long. She actually said to him, "I think you speak. I've seen every draft, and I hate to say this to you because you're the Prime Minister and I'm just the Secretary, but I think your speech has just completely lost the plot." Yeah. And he took it and he said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she explained. Then he said, "Well, let me read the first draft." And he said, "Yeah, you're absolutely right. Put that back in."
The fact she felt that she could say that says
that's
a lot.
a team culture.
Says a lot.
And she also knew, she never did it again, by the way.
But she never got off the plane?
No, the reason being that it was rare that she would have had that insight and that thought. But she knew that if he had disagreed, he's not going to come to me saying, why is your secretary telling me what to do about speech?
Yeah.
So, because we had that team culture.
Now, you mentioned there about what makes a good leader, and an awful lot. We can't have you here tonight without talking about your time in Northern Ireland and all your hard work during the peace process there. You've written about how David Trimble, as an example of showing really good leadership and courage during that period, maybe just bringing that forward to the current stalemate that we have in Northern Ireland. Is that because we have a lack of leadership there, a lack of courage?
Well, I don't know if you watched Question Time on BBC the other night, but if you didn't, check out Sorcher Eastwood's little assault on Jeffrey Donaldson. It's very, very impressive. I think that it's really interesting, the thing about you mentioned David Trimble specifically. There's no doubt that he showed leadership and courage, no doubt about it. But what was fascinating, I mean, Bertie's here tonight, what was fascinating about that whole period was there was a collection of leaders of very different personality and very different character. And if you removed any one of them, it might not have worked as well as it did. Okay. The fact that Tony and Bertie Ahern got on so well, the fact that Bill Clinton said and meant, you can get me out of bed any time of the night. If I can make one call to make a difference, I'll do it. That commitment. The fact that you had George Mitchell, who was so committed and so patient. The fact that Adams and McGuinness did, for whatever reason, at a particular moment in time, decide they were going to pursue a different strategy. And then some of the people that are maybe less well known on the kind of global stage, the Women's Coalition and people like Gary McMichael, and there were so many people in different leadership positions. But I think David Trimble, I think it is right that David Trimble and John Hume got the Nobel Peace Prize, because I think it just, they were the ones that, I mean, it wouldn't have happened without David Trimble. And what was extraordinary about his leadership is that, again, a bit like the Merkel thing, he didn't inspire you as a leader in technical sense. He could be, I mean, I'll never forget once when Tony wanted to get hold of David right in the middle of this sort of big crisis when he wanted him to come in. And David had gone to Australia to watch an opera. And it was like, what's he doing? And he was a very mercurial character. But that goes back to your point earlier, that leadership comes in very, very many different forms.
Well, fast forwarding maybe a little bit, we could be looking at a new Labour government under Keir Starmer, the way things are going.
Bloody hope so.
How do you think he'll handle the political issues there in Northern Ireland, or the stalemate?
Well, he knows a lot about Northern Ireland because he part of his job when he was working in the Crown Prosecution Service, he worked in Northern Ireland. I think he's a really interesting character, actually. He's not been in politics that long.
That'd be a good thing.
It could be. He's got that sort of backstory. And what I've been really impressed about him, I mean, I'm very kind of, I was one of those people in the early days of his leadership saying, wanted to kind of shake him, for God's sake, Keir. And I remember after Labour lost the Hartlepool by-election, he's my MP and he's a neighbour, so I see him quite a bit. And he came round for a cup of tea, and I was saying, what is going on? What is the plan? I don't see it. What is going on? And he said, look, I'm trying to do this thing in 3 stages. He says, you had Neil Kinnock, then you had John Smith, and you had Tony Blair. I'm trying to do in 1 term what you guys did in 2 or 3. And I'm doing it from that position in 2019 of an absolute catastrophic election defeat. And this was the first time I heard him set out a strategy. And what's been fascinating is then to watch him take it forward. He said, I'm doing this in 3 stages. Stage 1, we've got to decontaminate the Labour Party brand. Stage 2, we've got to show that the Tories are absolutely unfit for office. Stage 3, I've got to show the difference. Well, we're now in stage 3. And you've got to say he's done stage 1 and 2 really, really well.
Yeah.
And I think Keir could be, this may be a little bit of wishful thinking, but I think it is entirely possible that Keir could be a much more effective Prime Minister than Leader of the Opposition. by which I mean, I think he's a creature of government. I think he's serious. I think he is absolutely committed to public service.
Yeah.
I think he's, and I think he's calm as well. He's got a calm about him.
But does he have work to do inside his own party? But because, you know, there is a thought there that because he was part of the Jeremy Corbyn regime, that he might have alienated the right-hand side of that party, and that does he have more work to do to be more popular within his own party?
I think he's in a pretty good place inside the party. And the thing about Jeremy Corbyn, and the Tories are convinced that if they can just remind people that Keir Starmer sat at the top table with Jeremy Corbyn, but I actually think there's a very easy way of dealing with that, which is that, you know, and this I think happens to be the truth. Keir Starmer, he's probably a bit to the left of Tony. He's probably to the left of Tony Blair. I don't think he's that far left of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. But I don't think he ever thought Jeremy Corbyn was going to become Prime Minister. And I think he thought fairly early on that he could become the leader. But he wasn't going to become the leader if he gets outside the tent. And so I think there's a ruthlessness there, which actually it's quite hard to say, look, I'm quite a ruthless kind of guy. But actually I think within the political world, I think people respect that a bit.
Well, he is a lawyer, isn't he?
He's a lawyer. Doesn't make him a bad person. There are some very good lawyers who go into politics. Tony Blair. No, but I think Keir's got a... I'll tell you the other thing I think that's really... I find interesting about the way that he... do you remember when the whole Partygate thing was going on?
Yeah.
And the Daily Mail, an evil newspaper, they were trying to sort of suggest that, you know, because Keir Starmer was pictured with a bottle of beer in his hand in Durham, that he was on the piss the whole time as well. And they had about, I think they went 14 days in a row with that as the front page of their paper, absolutely sort of running a campaign on it. And I saw Keir a bit during that time, and there was just this calm about him that I think is... And I think at the moment, what do we need in our politics? We need serious, we need sensible, we need to get back to dealing with facts rather than myths. We need somebody who's going to just be able to kind of do a decent, difficult job. And, you know, I'd rather have him there than any of the 5 we've had in the last 6 years.
Yep. Okay. Well, maybe just to move on, over the last couple of weeks in particular, we've received an awful lot of questions from the audience on the situation in Israel and Gaza. Having been so heavily involved in the peace process in Northern Ireland, do you think there are parallels between the two, and what learnings from that process could be applied to the situation in Israel and Gaza?
Well, there are parallels. You know, deep-seated historical hatreds that are very difficult to address. The loss of life at various stages, which further fuels those hatreds. But ultimately, I think the biggest parallel is that you're not going to get to any reasonable settlement of the hatreds and the conflict unless you have a political process. And I think one of the reasons that this has happened in the first place is because people took their eyes off that. Now, for some, you know, I think that at the moment Netanyahu is being kind of presented as a, you know, war leader and clearly is in a very, very difficult position. But the fact is that the politics of his government went so far right that there's I think you could even make the case that he was, and this has been said by, we recorded the podcast this morning for tomorrow, and Rory Stewart was quoting Thomas Friedman, the New York Times columnist, who's pretty well plugged into the region, that, you know, it was almost part of Netanyahu's strategy to divide and rule, to have, you know, Hamas as the terrorist, the Palestinian Authority as the corrupt lot. And, you know, we all took our eyes off the ball. I think Jake Sullivan, who's Joe Biden's national security advisor, literally 2 weeks before Hamas launched the assault, he said, we've never known the area so calm. Well, to be fair to him, he did add the caveat, of course, you never know what's going to happen. But I think that is the big parallel for me. Unless you have commitment from the major players in the world that this has got to be fixed, And it's hard. Right now, today, it's very, very, very hard to see how you get... We all talk about the two-state solution. How do you get to it in these circumstances? How do you get to it with these leaderships? Very, very difficult. But there were moments in the Northern Ireland peace process when it felt as impossible as this.
You did, I thought the summary on one of the recent podcasts, I think Rory did a summary on the history. I thought it was fantastic. But what I was really taken with on that podcast was, I think it was a comment that you made that you show any sign of empathy for anybody on any side of this, and the opinion is polarized and you get attacked straight away.
Yeah.
That's a very difficult place to be, never mind talking about a potential solution.
But that's why I think you've got to, if you're in it, if you're one of the main players within it, I think you've got to try to push all that to one side. It's very, very difficult. But I'll give you an example. We interviewed the Palestinian ambassador on the podcast. Now, we wanted him to come on and gave him a platform. We challenged him on certain things, but we wanted to hear him tell his story and give his perspective. And it was, we were inundated with people either saying you were way too soft on him, or they were saying you were way too hard on him. And that's because those who were saying you were too soft had basically decided his viewpoint was never going to be right, and vice versa. And it's the same in America at the moment. If you go to America, and you're talking to, people that you would normally think were going to be quite reasonable to talk to. Yeah. But if they're Republicans, then, Biden, it's not just that he shouldn't be president, everything he does is wrong. And if you talk to a Democrat, there's nothing that a Republican can say. And when you've got no way of bridging that, and of course what's happening with the speakership in Congress, I mean, that's a symbol of that. There's no way of bridging that gap. And that's lethal.
Yeah. Well, maybe we just leave that topic there for the moment. And we'll go across the Atlantic now that you mention it. And the US primaries are nearly upon us. Mm-hmm. And keeping with that kind of theme of polarization that you just mentioned, a big topic in the States seems to be Joe Biden's age. Mm-hmm. I think if he's re-elected, it'll be 86. Mm-hmm. He'll be 86 by the time end of his next term. And Trump is only a couple of years younger and comparatively unhealthy. If you were the press secretary for Joe Biden's team, how would you advise Joe Biden handle the age question?
Well, I think you've got to do a bit of show, not tell, haven't you? Look, there's no point denying that it is an issue. I actually do think, this may be my bias coming out, but I watched a thing that Trump did yesterday. He was talking about Viktor Orban as the leader of Turkey. And I'm thinking, we were going about Biden, but Trump, it strikes to me, has got quite a few cognitive issues going on as well, on top of all the other awfulnesses. And look, I'm 66, right? And I've got...
Looking very well for 66.
Thank you very much. I've got a lot of energy, and I feel fit, and I keep fit and all that stuff. But I definitely have noticed that I get more tired than I used to. So what it's like at 80 odd, I don't know. So but the truth, if Joe Biden has decided he's definitely standing, then the Democrats have just got to get behind that. Now, to be fair to them, I think they are.
There's a dearth of anybody that is popular. Like over the weekend, there was a survey and 63% of Americans are saying that they're dissatisfied with all candidates on all sides. Why is there such a dearth of talent?
I mean, it is
in the States.
Well, it's not just in the States; it's around the world, isn't it?
Yeah.
Something like in France, somebody like Macron emerged, and I think Macron's a very, very special kind of political character, and yet he's now incredibly unpopular in France. You look at some of the Sanna Marin in Finland, Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, Nicola Sturgeon. There's been leaders that have emerged and looked strong, but then they're not lasting as long as they did. And I think part of it is just this general battering of everything to do with politics and politicians. And I think we've got to be very, very careful about it. Because when you say there's a dearth of politicians, of good politicians, that is the result of fewer and fewer people thinking that they might do it. And so you end up, that's how you end up with people like Boris
Does social media have a role there, but because
yeah, it does.
In terms of the polarization, particularly
Absolutely.
in the States, the beauty of social media.
Not just in, you know, if you take, if you're a woman in politics, if you're a woman of colour, even worse, Diane Abbott is the most abused person on social media in Britain, right? Now, it's about race, it's about misogyny, all this stuff. Now, and that is part of the populist playbook, by the way.
Yeah.
You know, this is the strategy to kind of, but the net result of it is that fewer and fewer people are even thinking about going into politics. So you end up with the, you know, it's easier to get to the top. Can you imagine? I mean, I look at the current cabinet in Britain. I don't think any one of them would have got anywhere near Thatcher's cabinet. I just don't think they have the quality. I don't think Rishi Sunak would get near it. So now we can sit there and say, oh, that's because they're not very good. But the reason they're not very good is because fewer and fewer. Let me ask the audience here, how many people here would think about going into politics? Right? So that's the problem. That's the problem. We've all got to take some responsibility for this.
Yeah.
And if we spend all our time saying, they're all shit, they're all terrible, they never tell you the truth, they never this, they never that, then don't be surprised if we end up with bad people.
Well, what they are all going to do is answer the poll question.
Oh, well, I hope so.
So the poll, if you scan the QR code, please do answer the poll questions. And also, we're going to have a nice period at the end here to have a few quick-fire Q&As with Alastair.
Okay.
But before we get there, Alastair, at this event, a lot of you were here last year, and you might remember that we had Janan Ganesh from the Financial Times here last year. Mm-hmm. Now, his theme, Alastair, was the folly of prediction. Mm-hmm. So a good example of that, as Janan would have said, is if we're all standing around in 2018, we'd have certain certainties about the world. And one of those certainties would have been that wars between states in the Western world were a thing of the past. Yeah. So there's obviously folly in that now. He addressed a couple of certainties, and then he kind of argued against them. 12 months on, it'd be really interesting to hear your views on two of these, right? Both close to your heart. Mm-hmm. The first one is, Labour will definitely win the next UK general election. Now, before you respond, Janan's view is that actually the surest way for an existing government to get re-elected isn't through some sort of grand vision, but by demonstrating basic competence, and that he felt that Rishi Sunak will demonstrate basic competence.
That hasn't gone very well, but anyway.
And that recessionary times are probably worse in election terms for Labour than they would be for the Tories. Mm-hmm. So 2 questions here for you, really. Will Labour definitely win the next UK general election? And secondly, if so, will it be by a landslide given the by-election results last week?
I mean, I am a professional pessimist. I remember in 1997 being in a hotel in Luton a week before the general election and getting a phone call from the Daily Telegraph saying, we've got a poll tonight showing you 28 points ahead. And I said, I don't believe it. It's a rogue poll. That is not what our private polling shows. Okay. I think you've got to win big. Your question about a landslide. To win big, you've got to fight like you think you're losing. I think Labour has to keep the mindset that it can be lost. Now, if you look at the numbers, it's hard to see how the Tories get back from where they are. Yeah. I agree with you. I don't agree with Janan that competence is the main thing. I think competence is an absolute minimum. Now, what I would argue is we've had a series of very incompetent prime ministers. I'm not convinced that Sunak's that much better. He certainly doesn't have a vision for the country. So I think he's in a very, very bad place, added to which his party is becoming a rabble. I mean, Rory Stewart talks about this a lot in the podcast. There are several parties within that party. So Labour should win the election. But I was in Scotland last week. We were talking to Alastair, the Scottish Labour leader. And he was saying that if Labour get 25 seats up there, okay, that's quite a big if, but if they get 25 seats, then the task for Labour in England becomes way easier. Right. If Scotland stays as it is, Labour have to win in England seats that we never won in 1997. So it's not a done deal.
Okay.
It's not a done deal.
Okay, the second one is very close to your heart. Brexit is a done deal and a settled matter for a generation. Janan argued that empirical evidence suggests that younger people, the next generation, are actually pro EU in the UK than maybe the previous generation. Is Brexit a done deal? Is it a settled matter for a generation?
Well, it's happened. We have left the European Union. But I'll tell you, there's a question I ask every single audience that I speak at, okay? And the question is this: hands up, who thinks Brexit's going well? And that is the response everywhere. Nobody thinks it's going well. Nigel Farage doesn't talk about it anymore. He's moved on to net zero. You know, it's like, so I think at some point it's got to be fixed. I saw one of your questions.
Well, we're getting on to that now.
Right.
Don't spoil it.
Okay, I won't spoil it. But I think that, look, I hope we get back into the European Union at some point. But there's another angle to this. See, we sit in Britain, and particularly with our ridiculous kind of nationalist, populist media, we sit there thinking, here's Britain, and the whole world's thinking about Britain. Most of Europe isn't thinking about Britain anymore because we've left. And we just don't have the same clout and the same power that we did. And meanwhile, I look at Europe, and it's not impossible, and I speak here as somebody who thinks that leaving the European Union was the worst act of folly, the worst act of self-inflicted damage that I can't think of any other country that's done something quite so stupid to itself, right? But equally, I look at the European Union, and I think it's not impossible that Marine Le Pen will be president of France. In the Netherlands at the moment, they can't even put a government together because they've got all these kind of factional thing going on. In Germany, the Alternative for Deutschland, which is a very, very right-wing party, currently polling on about 25%, and in some elections, in regional elections, they're hitting 30%. You've now got in Scandinavia 20%-ish voting for hard right populist parties, some of which are now in government. So it's not like Europe is going to stay still. So Europe's going to have to adapt to some of this as well. So I think the question about whether we go back into the European Union is a massive question for us. But the question is also, what sort of European Union are we talking about?
Back into,
yeah.
Well, let's find out what the audience think, because last year we asked this question, and I don't know whether we can get the results put up on the screen. Last year we actually asked this question, and do you think the UK will be back in the EU by 2040? Now, it was a bit split last year. 46% said yes and 54% said no. So, Alastair, let's see if the 12 months have made a difference. No. Actually, a harder no 12 months later than this time last year. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, to be honest, I think it's unlikely. I think a lot depends on what happens, obviously, and if Labour win. You see, we've got a situation, right? So every single person in this room, pretty much, unless I misread the response, thinks Brexit's not going well. I did a business event the other day in London, about 600 business guys. Every single one said if there was a referendum tomorrow, they'd vote to go back in, right? But there isn't a referendum tomorrow. So Keir Starmer, let's say Keir Starmer becomes Prime Minister. He has been absolutely, this has been part of his strategy. He's been absolutely clear, we're not going back into the single market, we're not going back into the customs union. Right. Equally, he is going to have to renegotiate the trade and cooperation agreement because that is part of the process. Now, I hope to God that is the beginning of a realignment, a resetting of the relationship between the United Kingdom and the European Union. And I actually think for the public, the Tories still think they're onto something. You know, if they say that Labour's going to try and take you back into the European Union, I actually think Labour would go up in the polls if they did say that, but they're not going to say that.
Yeah.
So the politics on this have changed, and I just think the public are way ahead of the politicians on it.
Okay.
They just want it fixed.
The next question, maybe not in your wheelhouse, but there's a lot of finance people in the house tonight. And
Oh my God.
we have had a year of interest rate increases.
I'm going at 3%, 3.5.
Okay, well, I'll read the
Based
question
on
out first.
absolutely no knowledge whatsoever.
Where do we see the main ECB rate at the end of next year? And so the answers, my thought on this, it could be any of them, because God knows what's going to happen. Yeah, 39% say 3.5% to 4%. That seems to be the conventional wisdom. 37% say 4%. Interestingly, 2% of you say something else. As I said, my view on that, Alastair, is it could be anything, because
That's probably
we touched on it at the start. Like, things are changing so quickly that who knows where it'll end up.
I mean, Europe does. One of the interesting things about Brexit, I don't know if it's the same here, but certainly within the UK media, there's very little debate about the challenges now facing Europe.
Yeah.
But actually, they're pretty real.
Yeah. Now, the last question on the poll, again, this is one from last year. So the question is, what is the biggest medium-term threat to global political stability? So China, Russia, Donald Trump, or climate change. Palestine and Israel and Gaza aren't on there, but last year it was a spread. Before we show the results, last year it was a spread between 29% said China, 29% said Russia, and 28% said climate change. So let's see if 12 months, what do you think?
Trump wasn't there.
Trump was there, but it was only 13%.
Okay.
I wonder, will that increase given we're closer to the US?
I think China will be number one.
Re-election of Donald Trump is now, you've gone from 13% last year of you to 33% now say the re-election of Donald Trump is
Right,
the biggest medium-term threat to stability.
let me ask this question then. How many people actually think that Donald Trump is going to be re-elected? Not that many. Not that many. So that is.
Do you think he will?
I think not, but I don't think it's impossible. I don't think it's impossible. I think he's. I mean, this is. We talk. We talked earlier a bit about populism. You've just get your head around this, that every time Donald Trump has been charged with something, his ratings within the Republican Party have risen. Every time. Now, that says, and you can see in his dealings when he's been appearing in court, he sees it now as part of his campaign. So that tells you the extent to which polarization and populism and post-truth have got an absolute grip on a section of the electorate. Yeah. That's not going to go anytime soon. So it's entirely possible he could be the candidate, even from a position where he is totally locked into this process.
Didn't he once say he could stand in Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and his election?
And there's something in that. There's something in that. Yeah.
Okay.
I thought China would have been your number one, because I think that is. I think China-Taiwan is a much bigger threat.
It's interesting that this time last year, Russia continuing the land war in Europe was 29%. And that's dropped to 20%.
But you see, that's how this stuff works. It's normalised.
Yeah.
Look how quickly. Yeah. I mean, October the 7th is what, 2 and a bit weeks ago that we had the Hamas attacks, and now you're waking up every day, you're seeing these incredible pictures of destruction in Gaza, and it's normalised. And so the Ukraine situation has just been. It's just been normalised in our consciousness. That's what I think why it's dropping down.
I'm very conscious of time, Alastair, so we'll move on. Tons of questions from the audience.
Yeah, I love questions.
Lots of questions. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. Here's a good one to start with. We're being asked, how does a long-term incumbent government defend itself amidst challenging political and economic headwinds? Or is it inevitable that each government has a shelf life regardless?
Well, the other thing that makes me think it's virtually impossible to think that the Tories can win again is because it's never happened in our country before that you've had 5 in a row. So the worst government in history would have to make history by becoming the first to get a 5th term. It's incredible. So that can't happen, surely. We had that. You had a point when you had a kind of one-party government running through Japanese politics for quite a long time. I think one of the things that's happening in Scotland at the moment, by the way, is actually just that sense of they've been in power long enough. Now they might win the next election, I don't know, but I think it's less likely than it was.
Okay, we'll be more positive, right? Okay. What makes you optimistic in today's world? I have no idea what you might say to this, but yeah.
Well, I'll tell you when I get optimism and hope is when I go into schools. I do loads of talk. The last book I wrote, which is about activism, and I've had loads of invitations to go and talk to schools. And I was in one the other day, Paddington Academy. There was barely a white face among them. There were loads of young women wearing veils. There were Iraqis, Somalis, Iranians, Kosovans, and so they were just so bright and energetic. And I thought, you know, that here we have the politics that gets debated at the top level of older people and the politicians and the media is of Suella Braverman sort of demonizing immigrants as kind of, you know, scroungers and all the rest of it. And I was thinking, these are immigrant kids, or kids of immigrants, and they're going places.
Yeah,
they're going places. I could feel it, and so that's what gives me hope. I think the younger generation has worked out the scale of the mess that we're in, and I think they've got a better take on how to get out of it.
Okay. In the interest of transparency, I'm going to read the next question out, right?
Oh.
You don't have to answer this.
Oh.
Alastair, your daughter's a well-known comedian. Is it true that she advised Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng on their economic policy? Thank you for that, whoever sent that one in.
My daughter is I don't know, well-known. She's done a couple of gigs in Dublin, though, but she is a comedian. Check her out, Grace Campbell. She's very funny. But she is way more politically sassy than Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng.
Okay, a lot of questions about Tony Blair. Tony Blair had a vision for his political movement. Why do so few modern leaders have any compelling vision for a better world? Kind of touched on that already.
Maybe, I don't know. I really don't know, because I think they're scared of setting themselves up to fail, so they do this kind of incremental approach to stuff. But you know, what is leadership? Leadership is about, you know, I write in the book about how I was in Canada once at this conference, and this guy told a story about how the word leadership came from the frozen wastes of Canada when the water iced over and they had to get the ice ship out, and it was called the lead ship. And that is, this guy argued, where leadership came from. I've checked it out. I can find no historical evidence to back it up at all, but I just love that account of that. And that's what leadership is. It's about setting a course and saying, this is where we're trying to get to, and I'm going to open the waters up, and then more and more people can follow. Wow. And yet we just, you know, we have very few leaders these days who operate like that.
Sticking on the Blair theme, was Blairism the start of populism in the UK?
No.
And if not, why not?
No, I don't think it was. I'll tell you why, because populism isn't about being popular. Populism is a form of politics that sees a problem as something to be exploited rather than something to be solved. That's what populism is. So to talk, you know, Braverman, who, by the way, I think is going to be the next leader of the Conservative Party, and the one after that, and I'll save that one, because I know you've asked me to make a prediction later. So
thanks for spoiling it.
So Suella Braverman, I don't believe she thinks that the so-called small boats problem is going to be solved by sending people to Rwanda. She doesn't believe that. It's not a way of solving the problem, it's a way of keeping the problem going and exploiting it politically.
Okay. Well, maybe in more positive...
You're determined for me to be positive, aren't you?
I am, yeah.
I can't even talk about my football team.
This is a good question, actually. Following the recent elections in Poland, is the result directionally positive for Western values and democracy?
Well, I hope so. But on the same day, you had the Australian referendum going down, and you had the New Zealand election going to a populist leader. So, yeah, but the Polish election was amazing. It really was. When you think about what that guy was up against, they'd completely suborned the state media. I mean, my book publicist is Polish, and she was translating for me some of the news coverage in the main, like their BBC equivalent, their RTE equivalent. And it was literally like the bulletin was like 15 minutes on how brilliant the PIS were, and then 15 minutes on how awful the opposition were. Like as their state news. So you had that, they had the judges in his pocket, had all that stuff, and yet, you know, they've lost. So that was a great day.
Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, a question that I have: what are you in your career are you most proud of?
Playing football with Diego Maradona.
You talked about that.
Yeah, and I mean, that was it. No, I think I hate answering questions like that because there's no way of doing it without sounding a bit sort of vainglorious.
Yeah.
The greatest day, bar none, was the Good Friday Agreement.
Okay.
And I was very, very proud to have played a part in that as part of Tony's team. And the other place where I felt my particular skills were most useful was in the Kosovo War.
Okay.
Because that was essentially a war that wasn't being won or lost militarily. It was essentially a propaganda battle. But no, playing with Maradona, honestly,
It was up there?
It was just, I can't, to this day, even my kids, right? The fact that because I played with him in a charity game, they met him, they say that was like their greatest achievement so far. So, you know, yeah, playing with Maradona, that's without doubt the greatest thing I ever did.
There's a Rory McIlroy story, which I won't bore you with, that we can talk about afterwards.
Rory McIlroy is nowhere near Maradona.
Yeah.
What are you?
Well,
he's
not
a
if you're
golfer.
Not if you're from Hollywood.
Okay.
Anyway, before we finish up, you actually spoiled the surprise. But anyway, give us one surprising prediction for 2024. You cannot say Burnley will avoid relegation.
Okay.
What should we look out for in the next 12 months?
But the thing I was going on to say, I think it is not impossible that within a couple of years, Nigel Farage will be leader of the Conservative Party.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
And in a funny sort of way, I kind of hope it happens. Because I've devoted most of my life to trying to explain to people why the Conservative Party has been, on balance, a bad thing for the country. And I think it's possible they could get battered. And if they get battered, they'll do what the Labour Party did when we got battered, which the Labour Party, when it gets battered, it goes to the left, Corbyn, and the Tory Party, when it gets battered, goes to the right. So when Tony beat John Major, they went through the whole succession of Ian Duncan Smith, Michael Howard, and eventually David Cameron came along and said, you know what, this is a really bad approach. We've got to get back closer to the centre. So I think the Tories will go right to the right.
Okay.
I think Suella Braverman will probably become the leader. She won't be very good at it. And the one thing that Farage is good at is campaigning as a figure of opposition. Anyway, that's my happy prediction. And I think if that happened, and my other, I've kind of already said this. I think the thing to watch for, I agree with Janan that in the current climate, predicting anything is kind of a bit of a mug's game.
Folly, yeah.
But I think that watching the European Union and watching the big powers in Europe and how they handle this. I was in Paris last week and I had dinner with Francois Hollande. He said something really interesting. He said, I think Britain has hit its peak populism. I think Brexit was your peak populism. We still haven't had ours. And I thought that was a very interesting observation, that some of the other countries of Europe maybe have still got to go through the pain that we've gone through with the nonsense of Brexit.
Okay. I tried to make you positive, but you finished on a negative. We do have to wrap it up there. I see that we're way over time. Can I just say
I'm really confused by your clock.
I know, it's started again. I'd like to say, that's how long we've been up here. I'd like to say a big thank you to the audience, not only for coming along this evening, but for your substantial contribution to the discussion. I want to also say thank you to my MHC colleagues who have worked tirelessly behind the scenes to make tonight's session run so smoothly. And finally, Alastair, thank you for sharing your insights and experiences with us. I think the fact that we've got a full house this evening is reflective of your enduring popularity on this side of the Irish Sea. So, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together one last time for Alastair Campbell.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.